Nice to meet you, gentlemen. So my name is Clay Hernandez. I am the National Director for Technical Sales and Training for Artemis Biosolutions out of Chicago. I work remote. I'm in the Florida area, and the other gentleman that's on the phone here is in their meeting is David Baker. He is our business development person. He's recording this, just so you know, and he's out of the Michigan area. And so Mark had introduced me a little bit about you guys doing the cleaning and things like that. So it certainly seems like mold would be a low-hanging fruit since you already have all of these clients that, from time to time are going to have these issues. So this is a very 50,000 foot view of mold remediation. Um, Mark had told me we got about 30 minutes. I went ahead and allotted 45 minutes so we can go ahead and do some questions and answers. And so let's go ahead and get started. So the initial process, there's four steps. Let me go back to, there we go. I messed this slide. So there's six stages to a mold remediation project. There's the assessment, which establishes what is wrong, what caused it possibly, what's the extent of the mold contamination. And I'll go through that in pretty good detail so you guys have a good understanding of what that is. And then the actual remediation project is broken down into setting up containment. Once you mobilize to a site, you remove the drywall. You have to clean and sanitize what's left after you removed whatever damaged mold impacted materials that are there. Then you have to dry and dehumidify the area. And then the restoration, which that's just remodeling. I didn't cover a lot of that in my presentation. Everybody knows what remodeling is, but the first five are the keys to this.
Okay.
The assessment. This is where you learn what's going on either through a phone call I get so just a little bit more background. Let me back up a little bit. I'm also an industrial hygienist. So we just had a couple of big storms come through. I've done a lot of that in the last 4 or 5 months. So I actually go out and do the inspections for asbestos and for mold. And I collect the samples and then I send those off to a lab. That information comes back. I compile all that information and assemble it into a report and on how to do the remediation. In certain states over here in the United States, you can't do both. You can't do the remediation and the assessment. They separate that just kind of, they don't want the fox guarding the hen house, so to speak, is the way I explain that. So I've been doing this for about 20 plus years on the remediation side. Now, just in the last couple of years, I've started getting to the assessment side. So this is what this phase of the remediation process is. This is going out and you get the call. They give you a little bit of background, what's going on, and then you show up and you start your assessment.
Okay.
So there's the initial consultation, as I just said, a phone call. Sometimes it's not even an owner that hasn't even seen what's there. They're just being told we have a mold issue. So then I show up and I talk to the occupants, get a little bit of history, and just trying to figure out what might have caused this event to happen. Once I have all of that information, then I start the actual inspection, and that includes a visual inspection, moisture and humidity readings. Then you collect samples, you look at the air conditioning system, that's the lungs of the building, and then you send those samples off to a lab. They analyze them, they send those back to the assessor, and then with all that information, they put a report together and then recommendations on how to fix it. One of the first things that you do when you go into a facility and you know that there's some damage in there or there's some water damage, one of the first things you're looking for is where do I start measuring? So one of the first things I do is use an infrared camera that shows me temperature difference. It doesn't show you mold. You don't want to be misled that this is showing mold. This is just difference in temperature. So you can see on that left screen up at the top where it's dry, it's 86 degrees. And then you see the colors changing. It's getting down to about 4 or 5 degrees cooler. That's where you can see water. This other picture on the right that just shows a wet ceiling. You can see a little bit of staining there in the background, but that shows you the true colors of the difference in temperature. So that's where you would start doing your moisture meters. This gives you the data points that you need. These are actual pen markers and surface markers. So this measuring the moisture, you can see that the one on the left, that's soaking wet. The one on the right is about 20%. So this is telling you that you have moisture impacted materials.
Okay.
If you want to have questions, go ahead and interrupt at any time, but there'll be Q&A at the end of this as well.
All right.
So now you've done the initial inspection with your eyes. You're looking around. It may not be visible mold, but you know that there's some damp materials. So you start collecting your samples. So the one on the left there, that's just showing you that you're collecting an outdoor sample. So what we do, just so you understand, and this is worldwide, there is no acceptable levels of mold in in science because it's a naturally occurring biological matter.
Okay.
So what we do in the industry is we compare indoors to outdoors, and then we look at the types of mold that come back, and then that shows you that there's some, could be some things going on. So this is the purpose of collecting an outdoor sample, and after you've done that, then you go in and you start collecting your indoor samples. So there's a meter there. It's a little vacuum pump. They have these little cassettes on them. You put that on there and you run it for a certain length of time and at a certain volume. Typically, what we do is 75 liters. So we run 15 liters per minute for 5 minutes. That's a typical air sample. So you can see how you set that in the middle of the room of concern and you collect that sample. There's also surface samples that you can collect. So this is a project I did just about a month ago. This had vinyl wallpaper on an exterior wall. There was
Okay.
water coming through the facade. The stucco had some cracks in it. So I removed the baseboard, and then you can see on the right there, that's a swab that I took a sample of. So
Mhm.
those results come back. I send it off to a lab. They analyze it, and that shows me some different species of mold. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail here in a second. So
Okay.
another way to collect surface samples is with tape. So you can see that on the left. That's a piece of tape that comes from the lab itself. You push that onto the visible suspect microbial growth. And we always call it visible suspect because you can't, I mean, it's easy to see, yeah, that might be mold, but in the industry, you don't say, yes, that's mold when just from looking at it. It needs to be looked up under a microscope. So these are tape samples. You can see it's just a pair in the middle there. That's just a piece of Scotch tape. You put that over the area of concern, you fold it into itself, and you can send that to a lab. Another way to collect samples is this one on the right. That's that vinyl wallpaper. You could literally just clip a little 2-inch section of that wallpaper off, put that in
Right.
a bag, and you could send that to a lab for analysis. So it's a tape lift, another tape lift, and then that's a bulk sample when you send the whole piece of building materials.
Okay. Right.
So you fill out a chain of custody. That's where I collected these samples, and then you send those off to a lab. The lab
Okay.
report comes back, and this might be a little bit hard to read, but I've got some more screens that are a little bit more blown up. But this shows you the different species of the mold. So you have Aspergillus in there, you have some Basidiospores. All of those are Greek to you guys, but in the industry, that's what we look for is water indicators. So you can see the one on the left is outdoors. That's a control sample. And at the bottom there, you can see there was 158 total spores. And then on the right, that was the bedroom. You can see that's pretty elevated. There was 743 spores. Now, a lot of these are just plant-based, and as soon as you open the door to the facility, mold's going to come in, it's going to go out. It's just part of the air. But again, what we're looking for is specific species that are indicative of water damage. So you can see at Aspergillus penicillium, that's one of those. There's 29 on the outdoor sample, and you can see 133 on the inside. This tells me there's some water damage in that building that's growing mold.
Okay.
So Clay, just a question. So there's quite a difference between those two rooms.
One's outdoors and one's inside. So that tells you there's something growing inside the residence.
I got it. Okay, sorry, I
Okay.
missed that.
So again,
Uh,
that's what we compare. Now, some of these I wouldn't be too concerned about. Corvalia, just, some of the Latin names, but some of those don't mean a whole lot because those are just naturally occurring outside. But when you have an elevated count like this with Aspergillus penicillium, that's indicative of, yeah, there's some stuff going on inside this place. Now, here's the surface samples that I took. And you can see they're rare, rare. And then at the bottom, the Aspergillus one, again, that's one that's indicative of water damage that's happening inside the place. And both of those samples came back with very high frequencies of Aspergillus.
Mhm.
So now this is the information that I take based on lab analysis. I combine that with my visual inspection, and that's how I start to put my report together. Now, when you're out there and somebody says, "Oh, that looks like a certain specific mold," I mean, it's microscopic. You can't look at something and say, yeah, that's what that is. That's Stachybotrys, so that's something. You have to have it analyzed under a microscope. These are the big ones that I was talking about. These 6 specific mold species are very indicative of water damage. Stachybotrys, that's referred to as the black mold. That's one that gives off toxins. That's one that can make people sick, even if they're not sensitive. And the other one that's down there is also fusarium. That's another one, number 6. These are ones that throw off mycotoxins. The other ones are just indicative of water damage, and you need to eliminate these because eventually they'll start breaking down your building materials. So you have
Okay.
Stachybotrys, you have Aspergillus, Penicillium. Those kind of these species specifically, those are almost combined together on the report because they're so similar they can't differentiate even under a microscope which one's more prevalent. So they just put those two together: Cladosporium, Alternaria, and then Fusarium. So when somebody says, "Oh, that looks like," well, this is magnified 600 times. So
Mhm.
there's no way you could look at this with the naked eye and say, "Yeah, that's what it looks like." A lot of times people say, "Oh, is it black mold?" Yeah, it might be colored black, but that doesn't mean that it's Stachybotrys. But I just wanted to give you an idea of how small these mold spores are, and that's how they differentiate. Again, if you look at Aspergillus there in the middle and Penicillium, you can't differentiate which one's which. So in the science world, they combine those and say they're indicative of both of them are present in that sample. And again, Fusarium on the left and Alternaria on the right. A little
Okay.
bit overdone on biology, but it's important to know when you hear these buzzwords, that's there's some water damage in that facility that needs to be cleaned up. So this is a typical report that I put together at the end of consolidating all of that information. I show you the person that it's going to. This is what a report will look like to you. Executive summary. I cut out a lot of the disclaimers and those types of things. I wanted to get to the heart of the matter here. This is an actual test that I did back in February. This is about an 8 or 900 square foot condo, a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, and then the front when you walked in was a living room. So you can see there's some pretty elevated counts. This one that I referred to earlier, and here I blew it up so you can see the Aspergillus penicillium that's there.
Okay.
So I take that information, and there's the surface sample that we were talking about. That was a swab, and then I start going into the report. So there's the interpretation of the results, and I explain in the top one, sample OC, that's the outdoor control sample, had this 6820, and then I explain sample A1, sample S1, sample S2, all of those unsatisfactory. There's something that needs to be done here. So there's my conclusion. Very similar. These are pretty generic reports. This is the one I use. And then section 5, that's where, as a remediator, this is what's going to mean something to you because this is what's going to drive your project. Site specific recommendations. This is what I'm recommending you do. So it comes into the bedroom, and I said set containment, remove the material, and do a final clean. We're going to go through all 3 of these steps in detail here in a
Mhm.
few minutes. But it shows you in each room what needs to be done. The living room, you can see that.
Okay.
And then the final clean. So this is this apartment. And this is, I would hope that any reports that you get, this is what's going to show. So here's the apartment that you see: the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Maybe it's 800 square feet. And
Okay.
then at the bottom, you can see my recommendations, and that's to remove the walls. So this is floor to ceiling, remove the walls. This is on the first floor of an apartment complex in a condo, and something was going on the second floor, and it was leaking down his walls. So there was mold that needs to be removed or drywall that needs to be removed from the wall. But anytime that you're looking at a report like this, it's also going to say go 2 foot past the last visible mold that you see. So in this instance, because the water is coming from upstairs, excuse me, I recommended pulling back 2 foot of the ceiling as well. Now, if you get 2 foot into the ceiling and you're removing it, you see right there at 2 foot, there's still some mold. You got to go another 2 foot. That's standard industry practice. 2 foot
Okay.
past the last visible mold. I'm sorry. So then at the bottom, you can see air cleaner. I'm sorry, clean the coils. That's air conditioning. If you guys are going to get to this line of work, hook up with an air conditioner mechanical contractor that does duct cleaning and air handling cleaning. To
Mhm.
clean a facility and not do the air conditioning system is just a waste of time because those contaminants have been going through that system for however long. So just because you clean the actual structure itself, you still need to deal with the air handler and the air conditioning system.
All right.
So the remediation process. So this is where you go in and you start setting up containment. Now, if you look at here, it says containment should be created separating the bedroom from other areas of the residence. If it's the entire place, then there's no containment needed. But this is just to show you an example. And when I show you this slide of containment, you'll understand if it was just in this bedroom, the last thing you want to do is go in there and start ripping out drywall and contaminating the rest of the structure. If you have one office or one bathroom in a big office and there was a water leak that wasn't known, it's behind a bathroom or a urinal wall. Well, you want to contain that to that bathroom and not spread it out throughout the office. And this picture here will show you why. So setting up containment. So this is what a containment looks like. And this is, you can see in the back wall there, there's some mold growing on the wall. So they're going to remove that. So before they do that, they set containment. They set up 6 mil polyplastic. They put it from floor to ceiling. They seal off everything. They have a little red zipper there. That's how you go in and out. And then you can see in that background there, that little blue box, that's an air scrubber that's pulling air from the environment and pushing it outside. So what it is in essence is doing is creating a negative air room in there. So when you open up that zipper, it's not going to let mold spores leave. It's going to suck fresh air in from the outside of that room into this environment. So it's
Okay.
creating a negative environment, negative pressure environment. So nothing can escape there. But you certainly want to go ahead and make sure you've got a good seal. So that's what it looks like in an illustration. So we talked about containment. So if you went in and started pulling back this vinyl wallpaper, spores are just going to go crazy. And when I say go crazy, this is a mushroom kind of magnified, but you can see when somebody says, I'm just going to go and clean it myself, throw some bleach on it. Well, every one of those little dots that's leaving that mushroom there is a mold spore.
Okay.
So if it wasn't lit up like that for dramatic reasons, you wouldn't even know that you could be able to see that. So ripping back that vapor barrier or that vinyl wallpaper, which is in essence a vapor barrier, you're releasing all those spores into that environment. So that's why you want to set containment. It's very important that you set good containment, and you need to learn how to do that
Yeah.
first thing. So so this looks like a little bit like that picture. There's containment. But and this is, I didn't put the description in here, but 1, 2, 3, 4, that's showing what's faulty in this. They don't have a good seal at the top there. This is only taped a couple of areas. They got some duct tape. So there's things that are coming through there that shows this is a shoddy installation of containment. Another word for containment is engineering controls.
Okay.
So this is a good example of containment. So you see even number 6 there, they're covering up the air conditioned ducts. Number 5, they have a foam pad at the top of their telescoping pole that's really put a good seal on that where it's touching that soffit. Number 4 shows good thick 6 mil plastic. The other door in that room, number 2, is sealed off as well. We don't want to bring anything in from there. And then the red zipper in the bottom there, that little zip wall, that shows you that that's the entrance that comes in and out. They've double taped it at the top there for strength. Number 1 shows you that the um, containment is even on top of the carpet. Carpet will be addressed at a later time, but right now we don't want the carpet to be getting infected. So they even covered the carpet in this example.
Okay.
So there's another example of the negative air. So if we don't have a window inside containment where you can exhaust your air, then this is another example where the machine is inside containment and then they cut a little hole and they exhaust it out of the containment. So that's what that tube is that's going outside. So that's creating that negative pressure inside containment that ensures that nothing's going to leave that space once you start tearing all that drywall out.
Okay. What machine is this?
This is an air scrubber. So this is it here. That's what it looks like.
Okay.
Negative air machine, air scrubber.
Okay. Negative air
So that's
machine.
sucking air in through the top of it there and then blowing it out to the right. This
Okay.
machine, the bottom left there is a dehumidifier. So you're drying that environment outside. You can also have these inside, but that's where you're setting your negative air. So this is be part of your learning curve on how to set containment properly and how to teach your people how to do this.
Right.
Because what happens is if you don't do this correctly, you may have just one office that's got a leaky window in this big giant building, a big cube farm outside of that office. And if you haven't set containment right, all of a sudden you've contaminated the big cube farm outside of that office. So again, it's very important that you learn the ins and outs of containment.
Right.
So now I've set containment. Now I start ripping out all of the moldy drywall. A couple of examples here again.
Okay.
And you'll learn. I heard somebody, I think you said you do some hotels.
Yes, please.
That's notorious for hotels, and it's almost a standard in the industry. I don't know about so much as like Motel Sixes, but the higher end hotels, all by design with their architects and their direct decorators, have vinyl wallpaper. Vinyl
Okay.
wallpaper on exterior walls is a vapor barrier. So if those walls are sweating, if it's 100 outside, 70 in the hotel room,
Mm.
this is the kind of stuff that you're going to run into with vinyl wallpaper. And when
Okay.
you pull that wallpaper out, those spores are just going everywhere. Again, you need to also learn about PPE. You need to have Tyvek suits. You need to have full face respirators. You want to protect all your eyes, your sinuses, breathing. You need to be fit tested. So this is an accurate way and a professional way to do mold remediation.
Okay.
Again, bad ceiling, something happened up in the attic space there, so they're tearing out all that ceiling.
All
Can't
right.
save insulation once it's that damaged, so you got to pull the insulation out too. You want to be able to get to the exposed wood.
Mm.
Again, another example. On the back side, it's also bad. So this is a good example of sometimes you can pull off if you're in a residential or even a commercial environment and you
Yeah.
can get to the backside of a tile wall. Sometimes you can save the tile wall by treating it from the backside. So you open up the hallway or whatever it is in a commercial building, you expose the backside of the tile, which should be on a Duro rock or some other type of thing. And there's chances that you can save the tile because that's where you really start driving up the cost of the remediation when you have to start tearing out tile walls in kitchens and bathrooms. So
Okay.
this is too far gone, you can tell, but it's just some surface mold because the problem was on this side, but it affected the back wall of a tile wall. Sometimes you can treat it like that. Now you've done all the removing. Now this is a critical part of it also. This is where you start cleaning. This is outside. This is just a rough example, but you have to clean all of the mold that's on the wood. It's not practical to remove building materials that are load-bearing walls and those types of things. So it's industry practice that you can clean the wood and then encapsulate it. So wire brushing is one instance where you can clean wood. This is called a sandwich wipe down. Let me see if I can cover it here. Okay. So this is just wire brushing a wall. Here you've got a stiff brush and you're cleaning all of those 2x4s and all that plywood. Now this is considered a sandwich wipe down, so you can before and after. So what's referred to as a sandwich wipe down is after you've done the gross removal of dirt and debris, then you wipe down, you HEPA and you wipe down again with the antimicrobial. So that's a critical step in being able to pass a post remediation verification, which we'll cover in a little bit, but that's a PRV. So you've removed all of those soft, porous materials that are impacted. That would be the drywall. Now you scrape and scrub and wire brush all of the building components that are left behind. There's an instance of before and after. That's an acceptable visual on the lumber that's still there. And then you call in for a post remediation verification. So again, it's critical that you learn the sandwich wipe down, which is wipe down with an antimicrobial, vacuum with the HEPA vacuum, and then wipe down again. And then that's when you're ready for calling for a final inspection, which is what you see on the right there. So then you call for your clearance testing. Again, it's post remediation verification or PRV. That's when somebody like myself comes out. They do the initial assessment and the protocol. They look to make sure all the work is done. Sometimes I don't review my own work, somebody else's report. Somebody else went in there, did all the work. Now I'm just coming in for the first time. So I'm going to look at the initial report to make sure that everything that was outlined has been followed. Then at that point, I go in, I do a visual inspection. I make sure all the building components are dry and the humidity is right. Anything over 50% is unacceptable because anything over 50%, you can start growing mold just on surfaces. So it's important that the humidity and the moisture measurements are accurate. Then I collect my air and or surface samples. I make sure I look at the air conditioning system, that it's been addressed and there's nothing visual in there. I send all that information out to the lab. The lab analysis comes back and I look at it if it's acceptable. Then I put a report together that says the building is clean.
All right.
So this is an example of outdoors. This shows total of 115 with 5 aspergillus. And this is the surface sample, I believe. No, there it is. So you can see there's only 3 spores. I'm sorry. So there's 116. And again, my water indicator, damage indicators, 5 aspergillus outside,
Okay.
none inside. Grevillea, that could come in, that could have come in with my clothes when I brought it in. Same thing with mycosites. So you can see it went from 116 down to 3. This passed. So now, once you get the okay that it's been completed, you go and you break down all your equipment and send them an invoice.
Okay.
That's the overview of mold remediation. Now, Mark has been talking to a few folks, and I'm not sure if you're a part of that conversation, but one of the things that's real big in the Pacific Northwest is mold in crawl spaces and attics. This is a client of mine that I've been working with for probably 5 or 6 years,
Okay.
and he makes a very good living of nothing but doing mold remediation in attics.
Okay.
A little bit of a different animal in that attic is part of the environment that's outside. They breathe. So you don't set containment, but you still have to remove the mold because it can start to deteriorate your building materials. So there's a need to still remediate it, even though it's not an enclosed, conditioned air space. So I believe that Mark has access to this protocol. It's just a white paper. But what he does is he basically goes in, he fogs the environment, does a knockdown, so to speak, and eliminates all the airborne mold spores that are in the environment. Then he comes back with a second step, and that's applying a very highly concentrated sodium hypochlorite product, which Mark is a distributor of, MSR Plus, mold stain remover. There's several of them on the market. One of the things that I like about the product that Mark carries is there's no odor to it, very low odor. That's the MSR Plus part of it. So in the beginning, when this gentleman here at PuroClean started doing these, nobody could be inside the house when they were fogging the attic. It was that strong. It would chase people out of the house. We introduced this product to Bob Jordan's his name, and now he is able to go in and do these attic jobs without anybody having to leave the premises.
And by the way, just to mention, so he's in Washington State, so that's a pure clean out of Washington
He's
State.
in Seattle, so he's not too far from you folks.
It's very nearby. That's right.
So again, this is a application via fogging of a uh, mold remediation product, Chem Decon. Then he comes in and he sprays, physically sprays with the deck sprayer, the underside deck of the roofing. And then he comes back and he fogs again. He doesn't have to remove the insulation. Uh, he, he he goes out, he does jobs that are $4,000 and $5,000, and the competitors are $20,000 and $30,000. He does
Oh,
an attic, a decent sized attic, 2,000 square foot. He could do 2 a day, a 2-man crew.
okay.
So that's how quick he can get in and out. So now, again, that's around a 2,000 square foot house.
And again, he charges how much for that?
I think he typically gets $4,000 to $5,000 for a 2,000 square foot house. Don't quote me on that, but
Yeah.
that's
Sounds about right.
so that's the mold remediation process. So a little bit of background here. When you're going into a mold environment that's in an attic like that, there's a lot of dust. There's a lot of what we call bioload in that environment. And that's where the another product that Mark is a distributor of is that ChemDecon. It's a product that was developed from by a U.S. national laboratory for weapons of mass destruction. So it's effective against some pretty bad active agents out there like anthrax, ricin, chemical weapons of mass destruction like ricin, mustard gas, and those types of things. So when it was developed, they had to develop with the idea that they weren't going to be able to go in and clean something before they disinfect, like you folks do when you go into certain environments. You clean and then you disinfect. They just needed to be able to have a rapid response with one product that no matter what was out there, it could break it down. So one of the things that's really good about it, and this is getting to the last slide here, but when I said bioload, and again, you guys will have access to this presentation, but I always draw the reference of you don't wax a dirty car. You have to clean a car and then you would put wax on it. Very much the same thing to hard, non-porous surfaces. You cannot disinfect a dirty surface. You have to clean it and then you disinfect it. You guys are in the cleaning business and you understand this. I just wanted you to appreciate what goes on in an attic when you're trying to disinfect or eliminate mold. That's one of the things that really stands out with these products that Mark carries is that it goes through that bio load because that's what it was designed to, and it still excuse me, still is able to disinfect even when there's a big bio load in the environment. So, real quick video here. This is the deck sprayer. So I'm going to show um, the MSR Plus. This is again, he has taken the ceiling out in this particular instance. Typically, you're up in the attic and you're crawling around, but you can see, and I've kind of fast forwarded this just for the effect, but you can see how fast it's gonna. So you can see how fast it's eating up that mold.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
again, it's different from what you guys do, but if it could be a source of a good revenue stream if you were to pursue this because you guys are in that high humidity environment all the time. Rain 300 days a year, so a lot of
Yeah.
problems with the crawl spaces in attics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's describing that. So this is another section I'm coming up here, and this is this initial part. I kind of got these backwards, but this is this is fogging in the environment. So this is your initial knockdown. Then you go back and spray, and then you come back and you fog again, and you're done.
Okay.
So this is how you're applying that product. So there's two different products. Chem Decon is part one and or phase one and phase three, and then the spraying with the deck sprayer is phase two of the remediation process.